Of course, Picasso's not the only artist that we're dealing with when we look at Cubism. We have to look at George Braque. Now, he began as a fauve painter who used the fauve movement as a point of departure towards Cubism. The Cubists rejected naturalistic representation, as we talked about, and preferred compositions of shapes and forms abstracted from the conventionally perceived world. The early Cubists could not achieve a total view through traditional methods of drawing and painting a model from one position. So they, of course, as we looked at with Picasso, dissect the figure. Well, not in reality, but virtually dissect the figure, analyzing the structure and form of the figure. Now, this will bring us to Analytical Cubism. So we have sort of the first generation of Cubism. Now we move into Analytical Cubism. This is a period from 1910 to 1912 and is referred to as Analytical Cubism. The paintings executed during this period will show the breaking down or analysis of form. Right angle and straight line construction are favored, though occasionally some areas of a painting will appear sculptural, as we're going to see in Braque's The Portuguese. Color schemes are simplified, generally tending towards the nearly monochromatic, hues of tan, brown, gray, cream, green, or blue being preferred, in order to not distract the viewer from the artist's primary interest, which is the structure or form itself. So the artist is most interested in the form of whatever they're painting. They're not interested in the local colors. So to stop you from focusing on color, they simply eliminate it and create a monochromatic form. And this gives us a little bit of a sense of that evolution where we're moving from point A to point B slowly. And by the way, when I say slowly, I'm not talking about over 50 years like we are in the Renaissance, or over 100 years. I'm talking over a couple of months, but you get the idea. Here we can see a form on the left that we can make out as a female form, female musician, and by the time we move to the right, it becomes much harder initially, although we definitely get a feel of a musician and a stringed instrument. And you can see how they're complicating the form, how they're breaking it down further and further with each iteration. Now, the monochromatic color scheme is suited to the presentation of complex, multiple views of the object, which have now been reduced to overlapping, opaque, or transparent planes of color. So imagine the whole thing as clear bits of glass that have been painted on, and they're simply being overlaid one over the other. It's a good way of kind of looking at it and understanding how these are constructed. These planes appear to ascend the surface of the canvas rather than to recede into it. So they appear to sit above the canvas and build up on top rather than falling back into the space of the canvas, which is what we're used to in most paintings. Generally, artwork does not come forward, it falls back. Paintings frequently combine representational motifs with letters, the letters emphasizing the painter's concern with abstraction. Oftentimes, they will mix these with motifs, their favorite motifs, such as musical instruments, bottles, pitchers, glasses, newspapers, still lifes, and the human figure. So let's look at one of the pieces. This is The Portuguese, probably the most famous analytical cubist work that we could deal with. And this exemplifies analytic cubism. It's derived from the memory, Braque's memory, of a Portuguese musician. Now, mind you, he's not sitting there with a model. He's kind of working from his head. What bits and pieces does he remember? Imagine trying to remember something that happened earlier today, someone that you met. You're not going to remember every detail about them, but there are things that will stand out. If it's a musician, the instrument, for example, may stand out, or a mustache, or a certain facial feature. He uses subdued tones common in Cubist work. And we see a construction of planes suggesting a man with a guitar. The letters and numbers allow the artist to play with the viewer's perception of what is two-dimensional and what is three-dimensional. So as we look at it, we have these letters that kind of make us wonder, Well, are we dealing with 2 or 3-dimensional space? But at the same time, we have these complex planes that we could almost trace out, for example, right here. And this plane seems to deal with the eyes. We have what appear to be eyelashes. Depicted here, maybe the side of a nose here. But that's one plane, and then we have a separate plane here, again dealing with maybe an eyelash, maybe a bit of mustache. Moving forward, we have this form in the center. Well, this form looks an awful lot like the sound hole in strings of a guitar. In fact, it's really picking up the most symbolic element of a guitar, the one piece of a guitar that we can all recognize and identify. As you move around, it seems to shift and change on you over and over again. At one point, you might think that this is part of a mustache, but it could be part of an eyelash. This could be a nose, but it could be something very different. We can't be sure. Ultimately, the constantly shifting image makes it impossible to definitively read the work. It constantly makes you question the space itself, and in that way, it also makes you analyze art in general. What is art? Because if it's nothing more than an illusion, a 2-dimensional attempt at capturing 3-dimensional space, then what is Braque doing? Because he appears to be taking 3-dimensional space and intentionally breaking it down into 2 dimensions and then not letting us forget that we're in 2 dimensions, even though he creates the illusion at times that we're in 3. You see how he's starting to play with the viewer. That'll be key later as we move into more modern movements. Examining this work is a disconcerting excursion into ambiguity and doubt, because you can never really be sure what you're doing here. It's like standing in quicksand. You can't be sure where your feet are. And if you don't know where your feet are, how can you make a statement? How can you jump off from any given point if you can't absolutely identify something real? But that's the point. He's analyzed it to the point that it is so real that it's really no longer real. It's almost meta.